What's up, everybody? I'm Z-Wade, the Z-Wade and Z-Wade Photo, coming at you from Z-Wade Photo Studio and Service to talk to you about the best lenses I've ever used in multiple categories and focal lengths. This list is not going to limit titles simply to the best optics, but rather superior optics, character, how fun it is to use, and or anything else I want. I'll elaborate per lens. Before we begin, tell me in the comments what your single favorite lens of all time is. Now, let's begin. Starting off in the wide angle territory is a third-party DSLR lens, the Tamron 15 to 30mm f2.8G2 specifically. This lens was a cannon barrel with a huge bulging front element, and it was just absolutely sexy to look at. But Z-Wade, I thought looks didn't matter. Well, that's just something that people with ugly lenses say. Kidding! Looks don't matter in lenses, but regardless, the performance of this lens in my testing was found to match or defeat Nikon's name brand wide-angle zooms in nearly every measure. Its vibration reduction was rather insane, allowing me to get stable images at 1/25th of a second back in the day when every camera didn't have IBIS. That is not a joke. Its colors, sharpness, and contrasty image output at that time was really hard to rival in my opinion, and its price tag was absolutely insulting to people who owned the Nikon version. Don't get this confused with the earlier version, which is still a great lens, but the G2 is an improved version. Kind of in this realm, I want to throw in a wide prime. I have a hard time deciding on the F mount Nikon 20mm f1.8G ED or the Nikkor Z f1.8S. I haven't shot the G series in a long time, and I feel the Z version is a little better in basically every way. But my god, at the time, the F mount G series 20mm was one of the few G series lenses that I actually not liked but loved. And being more of a D series fan, it would have to kick a lot of tail to grab my attention, and that it did. I used the Nikkor Z version way more than I thought I ever would, so I'm going to give it a slightly biased favorite, but if you're still in DSLR and have never used the F mount version, I highly recommend it. It's totally awesome. In the 35mm category, this is a no-brainer, the Zeiss 35mm f2 Distagon. Still one of the only lenses I've ever seen that comes as close to optical perfection as it did. Close to optical perfection is becoming more common these days, but at the time, and as is still the case in DSLR mounts, pretty much every lens had a compromise. Maybe it was super sharp with poor color, or excellent sharpness and color, but the chromatic aberration was kind of bad. Name your trade-off. The Zeiss 35mm f2 Distagon had almost nothing wrong with it unless you don't know how to manual focus. This lens has so much pop that still in a mirrorless world ranks my #1 for black and white photography ever. I have literally never seen a better 35mm lens. At the making of this video, I have yet to shoot with the yet to be released upcoming Nikor Z 35mm f1.2S, which I dream will knock the Zeiss 35mm off its high horse, but that is still going to be a very tough challenge for Nikon. Skipping up to the 50mm category, no surprise, the Nikon Nikkor Z 50mm f1.2S is one of the finest lenses I've ever seen, and at the making of this video is my #1 favorite lens of all time. This lens has made me a small fortune comparatively in the history of my career and led to more print-worthy photographs and creative pieces than any other lens from any manufacturer. I find it nearly impossible to justify not having it with me every time I shoot, and it is likely that at some point in every single shoot it will get used. It is really expensive, really heavy, and really big, but I promise you it's worth it. F1.2 used to be a gimmick or an emergency use case, at the very least an artistic f-stop, because it just wasn't that sharp and in many cases not really generally considered usable. Those days are gone. We have sharpness at f1.2 at normal focusing distance with stunning bokeh, and specifically to the Nikon Z 50mm f1.2S, a gorgeous tonal rendering and character that isn't often seen on modern lenses that prefer optical perfection in exchange for a unique look. This lens gives you near optical perfection with amazing tonal character, and that is truly amazing. Just to be nice, the Canon and Sony versions are very nice too. If you're enjoying this video so far, consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. And if this video is helping you, you can drop a super thanks message that says you're helping me shop or I learned something today. Next, I want to discuss my favorite 85mm lens of all time as of the making of this video. That is the Carl Zeiss 85mm f1.4 planar. While not optically perfect like its 35mm cousin we mentioned earlier, this lens is still wicked sharp with gorgeous skin rendering and amazing color. The pop you get with this lens makes subjects feel like they want to dance off the page. It's got a sexy, big, gaping hole front element, and it's heavy and it's metal, but not heavy metal, more of a Frédéric Chopin or Mozart classical vibe. Convenient because many people call this lens a classic. I call it a legend. The focus ring is absolute butter, and the build quality is so epic that it will probably outlive many generations, provided it's not totally mistreated. So far, nothing has ever come close to replacing the f1.4 planar as my favorite 85mm lens, but at the making of this video, the Nikon Nikkor Z 85mm f1.2s is coming soon, and I have high hopes that it will finally be able to dethrone my longtime favorite 85mm lens. You better watch out, Carl Zeiss, or start making Z Mount lenses soon. Let's talk macro, or 105mm category, or one and the same as far as my history goes. For years, my favorite macro lens was the Tokina 100mm macro, and it doubled as my favorite portrait lens. However, with the release of the Nikon Nikkor Z MC105 f2.8s, it was finally replaced on my favorites list. The Z105, of course, is a stupidly sharp macro lens and is one of the few Z lenses so far that has its own character instead of being totally surgically perfect and kind of flat. The color rendition is outstanding, the contrast is juicy, black and white images look sweet, and it's an amazing portrait lens on all Z cameras, but especially on the Nikon Z9. It is dead on with the eye tracking for some reason. I can't explain why, but eye tracking is kind of just better with the 105 MC than any other Z lens. Weird, right? If I may, while we're talking macro lenses, I want to jump back a couple of focal length categories. Back in the F-mount days, there was a little something called the 60mm micro. No, not the G version. It's just totally fine, but meh. I'm talking about the 60mm f2.8D version. This lens was so versatile, it's stupid. If you were active in those days, that lens could easily cover almost all the bases for walk-around, macro, portrait lens, and it wasn't that expensive. While that lens is one of my favorites of all time due to its image quality and all measurable terms, it just didn't quite fit in the standard focal lengths. However, it still deserves the mention that I'm giving it right now. In the comments below, let me know what your favorite lenses are in each of these focal lengths I've mentioned so far, and I'll wrap up with a couple of more subjects: mid-range zoom and telephoto zoom. Here we come, Trinity. Mid-range zoom's pretty much the moneymaker of professional photographers, unless you're a professional wildlife and sports photographer, in which case, get your $20,000 lenses out of here. No one can afford that, and if we could, we wouldn't know what to do with it anyway. My favorite has to be the Nikkor Z 24-70 f2.8s. I wish there was a long-term favorite that still reigned supreme, but let's be real, Nikon killed it with this lens. For me personally, this was the first time I had ever seen a zoom lens as sharp as a prime. Unique amongst the Z lineup, it also sports a sort of color character, I think. It's hard for me to identify the special nature of this lens, even as good as my pixel peeping eyes are. This lens just hits different. The only way you'll get sharper images is out of a Z mount prime. I'm fairly certain, to my memory, there aren't any F mount primes that are sharper. Maybe as sharp. Who knows? Who cares? This is, at the very least, the tastiest mid-range zoom I've ever seen in my life. Let's wrap this video up with one more category: telephoto zoom. Surprise! It's not the Nikkor Z 70mm f2.8s. Don't get me wrong, this lens is better in nearly every way than anything before it ever was for Nikon cameras. It's stupid fast, stupid sharp, and stupid useful. This lens, however, in my opinion, is, as I've said before, kind of perfect but flat. A lens can be magnificent and still be uninspiring. And this lens is just a tool. A darn good one too. But my favorite telephoto zoom is the Tamron 70-200mm f2.8 G2. At the time that it was released, it again would have offended anyone who owned the Nikon version. It seriously performed way above its $1,200 price tag. It came about during an era where Tamron said, "We are tired of this third-party image, and F all of y'all, we are gonna crank out some bangers and slap name brands in the face with awesome prices," and that they did. I think the reason this lens resonated with me and the Nikkor Z doesn't was simply the color. It was just a little bit beyond natural in its saturation, and it just had this wonderful rendering ability that made me want to get out and shoot it. Oh, and it was metal. I'm fine with plastic these days, but I wouldn't say no to a more expensive lens if it was metal. The Nikkor Z version doesn't make me want to get out and shoot photography. It is quite literally just a tool for a specific type of job that I don't even like being hired for anymore. But if you got money, I want it, and the Nikkor Z 70 to 200mm f2.8s will get the job done perfectly. I'll just post-process the character in later. I'm Z Wade, the Z Wade, and Z Wade Photo, and we'll talk soon.